That was weird. We're glad you're here, though. Even though that was weird, we're glad that you're here. That rhymes, and I love to rhyme things. But anyway, you picked a good weekend to be here because we are in the first of a 4-part journey that we are calling, very strangely, When Pigs Fly. You'll see the graphic coming up here, When Pigs Fly. And I don't know if you're familiar with this phrase or not, but it's actually a figure of speech. It's been around for a couple hundred years, believe it or not. And we use this figure of speech to describe something that's sort of improbable or maybe unlikely to happen, or even maybe in the impossible, kind of zone. Let's be honest, pigs don't really fly, right? If you look up in the air and see a pig fly, you probably either had a really, really bad burrito or a few too many margaritas with that burrito. So anyway, but just to get our minds sort of wrapped around this phrase, I want you to think about, I'll believe, let's just fill in the blank here. I'll believe blank when pigs fly. What's the improbable thing here, maybe the unlikely thing here that you would fill the blank in with? I'll believe, when pigs fly. I'll believe the Vikings are going to win the Super Bowl when pigs fly. That was not mine, by the way. Or I'll believe that Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi will become best friends when pigs fly. Yeah. By the way, we're going to do a political series after Easter. Yeah, no, believe it. Yeah, I'll believe that Fox News and CNN will merge together as one when pigs fly. Yeah, lots of improbable things there. Where this gets interesting, at least for me, is when we start talking about faith and when we start talking about Jesus and we start talking about the Bible. Because think about this. Christianity got started with what's called a virgin birth. And Christianity was actually founded on the belief that a dead carpenter was raised from the grave 3 days after being dead. And let me just ask you, do you believe that? Do you believe that there's a virgin birth and that Jesus rose from the grave after being dead for 3 days? Do you believe that? And if you do believe it, why do you believe that? And if you don't believe it, why don't you believe it? And I don't know, maybe you've been told this right here. Well, just believe, brother, or just believe, sister. And I think, that's unfortunate that I'm looking at myself right now, that we preachers say that to people. Well, just believe, brother, or just believe, sister, as if believing in Jesus, believing in his miracles, believing in his resurrection is in the pigs fly category. Like you gotta suspend all belief, suspend all thought. You gotta suspend all logic. You've got to check your brain at the door before you can believe the tenets, the beliefs of Christianity. And I think it's unfortunate that we've kind of peddled that kind of belief. Like just believe. Don't think, just believe. Now, don't get me wrong. I can't stand up here and look you in the eye and prove without a shadow of a doubt that God exists. And I can't look you in the eye and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus rose from the grave. I can't do that. Like I can prove to you that Italy exists. If you want to spend about $1,400 and leave after the service, you can get on a plane with me as long as you buy the ticket. I can prove to you that Italy exists. Although we may not want to travel right now to Italy, but I could prove to you that Italy exists. I can't do that when it comes to God or faith or the Bible or Jesus. But what I can do for you is I can show you what credible people say about what Jesus did. I can tell you that there's a lot of credible people, even at all of our campuses, who could tell you already that Italy does exist because they've been there. They've been there. And would you believe that Italy exists if credible people around you have been there? Yeah, you probably would. And that's what we're going to do in this series. We're going to look at a very credible person who actually was with Jesus for 3 years. He was called Jesus's beloved disciple. That means he and Jesus were like this. They were like besties, you know? And he was there, and his name was John. And John is late now in his life. He's probably the last man standing, the last man who actually walked with Jesus. And now he sits down late in his life, and he dictates, or he writes this account that we know in our New Testament as the gospel according to John. And John is writing this gospel for you, for me. He's writing from the perspective of, I wish you saw and heard what I had the privilege of seeing and hearing. Because John walked the dusty roads with Jesus. John laughed at Jesus's jokes. John smelled the BO that Jesus had when he was all sweaty and hadn't taken a bath. John, with his very own ears, was just amazed at the teachings of Jesus. John saw with his very own eyes these miraculous signs that Jesus performed. And so what we're going to do together is we're going to look at some of these signs that John saw, because John is basically saying, hey, I want you to believe on my credible testimony. I want you to believe because I was there and I saw. I want to give you the why behind why I believe, so that you too, you who don't have the privilege that I had to walk with Jesus as I did, so that you too may believe. So that's where we're going in this series. I'm so glad you're here. Let's grab a Bible. Let's turn to the very first miracle, which is found in John chapter 2. John chapter 2. I'll give you a moment to find a Bible in front of you, or to turn to a Bible app that you might have. And as you're turning to John chapter 2, let me just say that up to this point, Jesus had done no miracles. Up to this point, Jesus was just a carpenter. He's been pounding nails. He has not debuted his public ministry, as we call it. He is still sort of kind of staying in the background, in the shadows. And all of this is about to change in John chapter 2 as he performs his very first miracle, which, by the way, I don't know how this worked, but I don't know if there's like a heavenly committee, that was trying to figure out what Jesus's first miracle would be on earth. His debut miracle. I don't know if there was a committee that put together, here's miracle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What I do know is I don't think this one probably made the list. Does anybody know what Jesus's first miracle was? I'll give you a hint. It deals with H2O and Merlot. That kind of rhymed. I like that. All right, well, let's find out what it was. Here it is, John chapter 2. The next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mama was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, they have no wine. Now, let's just stop here. This may not sound like a big deal to you, but this was a big deal. Because back in this ancient first century culture, hospitality was a really big deal. All right? It was really, really big. And for a host to run out of wine that would be in the category of epic wedding fail. Let me ask you. How many of you have ever been in a wedding where something happened that was not part of the script? Anybody? Hands up on this. Okay, most of you have seen some wedding fails. If you've never been in a wedding where something shouldn't have happened that happened, we put a little compilation together just to give you a little taste of what happens sometimes. Here, watch this.
Oh, mommy.
Mr. and Mrs. Kevin Simon.
Bless, O Lord, the giving of these rings, that they who wear them may abide in thy peace, continue in thy favor, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
What did you do to her?
This ring.
Is hold and press and squeeze and love and love.
Yeah, it's pretty typical, right? Moral of the story is, if you're a groom, wear a belt, right? Turn your cell phone off and don't involve kids in any wedding at all. All right, that's just some of what we learned from that. Yeah, what happens in this wedding is they run out of wine, and this again was a big deal. The host would probably experience, I read about this from the first century world, would probably experience kind of a disgrace, a shame from this that would last weeks and maybe even months. This was a huge wedding fail. So what does Jesus's mother, who's there at this wedding, do? What does she do? She turns to her son and she does this. She gives him the elbow. She like, they're out of wine. Now, why did she do this? Again, he had not done a miracle yet. Up to this point, all he's been doing is pounding nails, right? Why did she turn and why did she go, they're out of wine, to Jesus? It kind of got my mind thinking, like, what was it like to grow up with Jesus? We don't know much about his childhood. We don't know much about his teenage years. We don't even know much about his young adult years. What was it like for Mary and Joseph to grow up with Jesus? I was thinking, here they are. I'm just trying to picture. This is the way my brain works. I'm sorry. They're sitting on the couch, Mary and Joe, they're watching Netflix, because they had Netflix back in the first century. They're watching Netflix and they run out of Doritos, which is an epic fail, right? Epic fail to run out of Doritos, right? So what did they do? Did they turn to Jesus and go, we're out of Doritos? And does he like that? And there's Doritos there. I don't know. What we do know is Mary turns to Mary turns to Jesus at this point. And she believes because she's seen Jesus. I mean, she heard the angel. She had a baby and she was a virgin. She puts it all together. And she finally turns to Jesus and she says these words, they have no more wine. She presents the problem to Jesus. And how does Jesus respond? I love this. Verse 4, how does Jesus respond? Dear woman, that's not our problem. Jesus replied, my time has not yet come. In other words, it's not time for me to start doing miracles yet. I mean, there's a whole plan going on. I know you weren't part of the plan, but I was, Woman, dear one. By the way, I kind of looked this up because I thought this sounds a little harsh. This is literally what it says. Woman, this is the actual translation. Woman, how does this concern me? How does this concern me? Now, I know there's kids and teens that come to our campuses during a weekend. I just want to speak to you for a moment right now. Please listen. If your mama says to you, clean your room, or take out the lawn, or take out the trash, or do the dishes, or whatever, do not, I repeat, do not say, woman, how does this concern me? Do not do this. I know we tell you to be just like Jesus, but do not do this at home, all right? Do not do what Jesus did at your home. It will not go well at all. It will not go well at all. Now, Jesus here is not being disrespectful, by the way. What Jesus is saying here, when he says, woman, how does this concern me? He's basically saying, okay, it's time to shift gears here. It's time to shift gears here. I was maybe not planning on doing a miracle here, but since you've pushed me, since you nudged me, I'm going to do it, which is symbolizing that Jesus' relationship with his mama and his family is changing. And Jesus is symbolizing right now that he's hanging up the hammer and he's going to start doing what he came to earth, what God the Father sent him to earth to do, which was what? To save the world. And I think what Jesus is kind of saying to his mama is this, Mom, I've come to save the world, not weddings. That's it right there. But since she pushed him into the corner here, he's now going to do the wedding. And so mom doesn't argue. She says in verse 5, she says these, but his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you. Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. We're talking about some very big water jars here. And I think we have a picture of what they might have looked like. Yeah, we do. There they are. And again, what was this all about? We got to kind of go back a little bit into Jewish culture, Jewish customs, Jewish tradition. The Jewish people had like 613 laws that they had to follow. And they all dealt with being right with God, pleasing God, and many of them dealt with literally how to wash your hands. Like lots and lots of laws, just how to wash your hands so that you would be, quote unquote, ceremonially clean or pure. Okay, so you kind of have to kind of just picture that all these jars, they represent all this water. It's all about focusing on external things. All these rituals and all these rites and all these regulations and all these rules were all about these Jewish people just keeping the external, quote unquote, pure. But getting back to these 6 water jars, what I want you to remember what they were, and here's the word for today, they were iconic. In other words, they were pointing toward something. They were symbolizing something. And what were they symbolizing? And here's the answer. They were symbolizing the old way, these Jewish people, the old way for them to relate with God, the old way of trying to get right with God. We would think of these jars symbolizing maybe the Old Testament or the Old Covenant. And this is all about externals. These things were the old way of doing things. All these Jewish laws and customs were on a timer. Yeah, they were all on a timer. They were all in place up until a certain point. And now their time was up. And why was their time up now? Why was this old way of relating to God, this old way of making myself right with God, why was the time up? And the answer is because a new sheriff was in town. And his name was Jesus. The new sheriff is in town, and now he's at a wedding. And what will the new sheriff do? Because he's been nudged and he's been told that they're out of wine. What will Jesus do? Will he say, no more wine for you? Will he go all wine Nazi-like, soup Nazi-like? Some of you are Seinfeld people, right? Yeah, will he do that? Or what will he do? Well, we're going to pick up the story. Verse 8, here's what he does. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. And when the jars had been filled, he said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So the servants followed his instructions. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though, of course, the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. Here it says, a host always serves the best wine first, he said. Then, when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you have kept the best until now. The best until now. You have kept the best for last. And this is not how people operated back then, because these wedding festivities went on for hours and sometimes days. You needed a lot of wine. And so what a host would do is they would bring out the best wine first. Why? Because that's when the palate is most sensitive. And some of you know this, and I'm not going to point at anybody or look at anybody right now, but some of you know this, that when you've been drinking for hour after hour after hour, and they bring out the old wine, the least expensive wine, you don't even know. You don't even know anymore. You can bring out almost anything, right? Again, I'm not thinking of anybody here. I don't even know anybody in my mind right now. But what this groom has done is the complete opposite. He brought out, and here's our phrase again, he brought out the best for last. And I want you to think about this. Because this is pregnant with meaning right here. Because this is exactly what God the Father did. He saved his best for last. Say, what are you talking about? I'm not talking about the best new rules for last, the best new rituals for last, the best new animals to sacrifice for last. No, I'm not talking about that at all. What was God's best for last? You know the answer. Say it out loud. 1, 2, 3. Here it is. Jesus was God's best for last. Yeah, all this other stuff symbolized by those water jugs was all going away. It was all on a timer. All of those 613 Jewish laws, all those rituals, all those regulations, all those festivities, all those feasts, they were all going away. Why? Because something new and better had arrived. Jesus. He came with a new and better way to have our sins covered. What did the Old Testament, what did the Jewish people have to do when let's just pretend like you're Jewish people from the Old Testament. What would you have done today? You would have brought an animal in to be sacrificed. Would have slit its throat and had the blood, covered the altar, and that would symbolize a temporary covering for your sin. That's how they did it. And Jesus is here, hand up, saying, no more. In fact, in 3 short years, what was Jesus going to do to cover their sins? He was going to climb up on a cross and sacrifice himself. And his blood would then cover our sins once and for all. Unlike the Old Testament, you had to just keep bringing more and more animals in, more and more and more and more and more. And because you keep on sinning, it had to be repeated over and over again. Jesus said, nope. My sacrifice will be once and for all for you. A new and better way to be right with God. And he also came with a new and better way to live. They had 613 laws, and Jesus showed up and said, okay, no more. One law. Jesus said, look at me. One law. It's the law of love. Love as I have loved you. What a first miracle, huh? What a first miracle. The very first sign, Jesus turns water into wine. It rhymes, and it's the first sign. And it's a wonderful, wonderful beginning. And I want you to see how John sort of sums up what happened next, verse 11. He says, this miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time that Jesus revealed his glory. First time he opened up the shirt and it said, Superman on it. First time. And his disciples, what? What's the next word? His disciples believed. They believed in him. Why'd they believe in him? Because some preacher stood up and said, just believe, brother. Just believe, sister. Is that why they believed? No. Did they believe because someone told them to check their brains at the door, suspend all logic, suspend all thought? No. Why did they believe? And the answer is because they saw. With their very own eyes, they saw Jesus turn water into wine. They believed because they tasted with their very own lips H2O turned into Merlot. They tasted it for themselves. And my question, you're going to see it right here, is this. What about us? Can we believe on their testimony? Can we take a reasoned step of faith? Can we? I know when I was a teenager, I wanted to believe. I was part of a church, though, that said, just believe, don't question, don't ask questions, just believe. And I wanted to believe. And I kind of believed. I kind of took a little baby step. But it wasn't until I went off to college where I actually decided, you know what? It's time for me to figure this out. Am I going to believe or not believe? Am I going to follow Jesus or not follow Jesus? I didn't have to anymore. My parents were way over there, and I was hundreds of miles away. I could do whatever I wanted to do. And so I started to investigate. I started to lean in. I took philosophy. Loved it. I took religion. And I started opening up the Bible, and I started to investigate the claims of Jesus. And I found out, and this blew me away, I found out that, when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that those guys were credible. That those guys are reliable eyewitnesses, that they're not just writing this stuff down, but there's actual historians from the first century world who were not followers of Jesus. Roman historians like Tacitus and Pliny the Younger, and Jewish historians like Josephus, who all talk about this movement. They hated it, by the way. They called Christianity a disease, but they wrote about this group of people and this leader who died, and all of a sudden these people went crazy and followed him, and all of a sudden they're just giving their lives for this person who died on a cross. I mean, it just blew me away that there's actually credibility to what we read about in the Bible. But you know what really helped me take a step of belief? is I started reading all these people who were, no exaggeration, friends, 10 times smarter than I am, who investigated the claims of Christ, doctors and lawyers and scientists and physicists and the smartest people on the planet who are coming to the conclusion that Jesus was indeed the Son of God, that he did indeed raise from the grave 3 days after being buried in a tomb. And I'm like mind blown that these people, way smarter than I was, are believing. And so it helped me. It helped me take a very rational, a very reasoned step of faith. And I'm so glad I did. And I just want to ask you, where are you at in your faith? Where are you at when it comes to this whole belief thing? Because maybe some of you, you need to take a step. You need to go ahead and put your thinking cap on, and you need to lean in and say, is there validity to these miracles? Is there validity to this person named Jesus? And he claimed he was going to die and be raised from the grave. And did he really pull that off? You need to do that. You need to do what I did several years ago and just lean in a little bit and do some reading. And if nothing else, if you're not a reader, I'm not, just come back next week. And then come back the next week and come back for week 4 of this series, because it's going to help you try to figure it out. Others of you are here at one of our campuses, and you need to actually put your faith to the test, because you've never done that before. And I want to ask you today, because we just looked at a miracle, the very first miracle of a wedding host running out of something, and then Jesus being nudged, and then all of a sudden there's wine, and they took wine home with them. He did a miracle. I just want to ask you this question right here. What are you running out of today? Don't say wine. What are you running out of today? Or what have you run out of today? This is what I want to ask you right now. Maybe as you try to figure that out, maybe you've run out of hope. I mean, honestly, things have happened. You got no hope. You're out of hope. Or maybe you're just out of joy. Or you're out of you're out of peace. You're so stressed out right now. You're just out of peace. Or maybe I don't know. Maybe you're out of mercy or forgiveness. There's somebody that you really need to extend it to, but you got none. You got nothing. But let me just ask you, what are you out of today? And are you willing to do what Jesus' mama did? Are you willing to do this to Jesus today? Are you willing to give Jesus the elbow? In just one word, are you willing to say to Jesus today, help, help? Jesus, I am so afraid. Would you give me courage? Help, give me courage. Jesus, I am so sad. Help. Will you give me joy? Jesus, I am so stressed out right now. I am so anxious right now. Help, help. Would you give me peace of mind? Jesus, I am so tired. I am so tired. Help. Would you give me strength? Jesus, I am so angry. I am so bitter. Help. Would you give me mercy and grace and forgiveness that I could give to someone else? I'm going to give you a moment right now. And here it is. This is what I want you to do. This is your time with Jesus right now. I just want you to take just a minute. And I want you to take this, and if you're willing to do this, just fill in the blanks. Jesus, and whatever it is that you're out of, help, give me, whatever it is that you need. This is your time right now to spend with Jesus. And then in just about a minute, your campus pastor is going to come out and pray over you. But first of all, you get to pray and ask for yourself.